All right, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. We are calling our March 3rd work session to order. We're a little off, but hopefully folks have voted. And if you have not voted, you got a little time. We will get started with our first item on the agenda, which is our North Carolina legislative update and our Board of Education short session legislative agenda. So we will welcome Caitlin and Matt from Brewbreaker and Associates and the superintendents as we walk through a quick snippet of this. And so I want to say before we get started, just to thank the superintendent and the vice chair for working on this legislative agenda. So the former chair that this is a task that was delegated to me when I was vice chair, and now I'm just going to delegate it over to our current vice chair. So I'll kick it over to you all, then we'll do some discussions around this. So welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We appreciate you guys coming and sharing this agenda with us. More than anything, we appreciate the engagement that you all have with the General Assembly and keeping us updated on legislative actions. And so again, thank the Vice Chair for working with us to make sure that we bring forward an agenda that you all could discuss and give your feedback before we bring a final portion. So they'll talk about this agenda and some other things that they see bubbling up in the General Assembly. So turn it over to you guys.
Hi there, Caitlin Rothaker and Matt Gross. For any of those of you who aren't familiar with us, I feel like most of your faces are very familiar. Hope everybody's well. It's primary day. And I will say that because a lot of, typically when we are giving you our general overview of what session's going to look like, we have a fairly good idea. This one is really, truly determined on how today goes. So, all I can tell you for certain is that we have in our adjournment resolution that short session will begin in April 21st or 22nd. That is basically all I can tell you. Whether or not they come in and try to do maybe a quick Medicaid budget before that, because we're technically in long session still, and in that same adjournment resolution from last session, they allocated a few days each month where the General Assembly can come back in to do some work. That hasn't really occurred in recent months. So I don't really expect that that's going to happen. It probably is more likely to happen at the beginning of short session if they were going to do some sort of quick, Medicaid-only budget. They could very well do a broader budget. There could be no budget. So that is very dependent on what happens in the primaries today. As you all know, there is a very big primary at stake, and that is President Pro Tem Berger's primary. That is a very tight one. And that is all I can really say about that. Obviously, the outcome of that is going to dictate how session goes forward, how the chambers, will be working together, and we will see. So I wish I could tell you a little bit more, but I truly cannot until after today. So maybe the next time you see us, we can give you a lot more detail on what to expect in that regard. With that being said, because we aren't entirely sure what a budget looks like, if there is one, that obviously impacts what we've got on your agenda. We are very, very hopeful that there will be, but that remains to be seen. We have looked over this agenda. I was telling the superintendent, when I saw your top 3 priorities, that I am very, very encouraged. I want to give kudos to you guys, pulling this together, because this is a very strong, concise agenda, and I think that these priorities mesh very well with what we anticipate being pushed and what we're going to see in a budget, particularly with teacher pay compensation. There's a ton of motivation to get that done. And then you're modernizing your special education funding formula. I know that there is you have some counterparts in New Hanover and other areas that are also on board with this same initiative, and they have been very noisy to some of our leadership, especially one of our big chairs, Michael Lee. I know that they're interested in doing this too. So there is some very natural and organic champions in the legislature, in leadership, budget chairs that are going to, have some reason and be motivated already kind of organically to go after some of these initiatives. So I could just kind of say that blanketly as an intro and just general observations and kind of what to expect with session coming up. I would say with kind of dates to keep in mind, April 15th is the drafting deadline for new initiatives. So anything that we want to, if we're filing something new, we need to get that in and kind of be ready to do that with language and have that all buttoned up by April 15th, which is before short session starts, with that April 22nd date. And then kind of the less rigid, but the general understanding is that about April 30th is when you want your budget request buttoned up and anything, in writing or something like that to have to drafting for things that we want to go into the budget. So just kind of dates to keep in mind. Anything you would add on general overview?
I would just note for that April 13th date, or April 15th date rather, that is for any new bill, because it's a short session, it's a budget adjustment session, it has to have some appropriation or some fee, something that attaches to money to be eligible. That said, what we often see in the short session is you can take bills that are no longer needed and rewrite them to do whatever, and that date's that's not a deadline for that. Sometimes an easier way to move things in the short session. Or also you see a lot of omnibus bills come together in the latter half of short session where language gets tossed into.
I'll kind of kick it to any questions, or where do you want me to go next?
So I'll just say, I know that our long session agenda, we have not conceded that. That's more, we'll tackle that once they go into a longer session, but taking some of the pieces that was off the long session, condensing it to this is where we've been advised that we can see some traction and have some great movement towards that. And again, I quote Dr. Ng all the time, it's not our wish list, it's not a Christmas list, it's our legislative list, and it's finding ways to get what we can get done with the General Assembly that we have versus the General Assembly that we want. So I will throw that out. And last thing before I kick it over for questions is that we will be moving on this forward with a quick timeline. The goal is to have this pass next board meeting, so we can then start the process. I know we want to have some meetings with the leadership, some of our rate delegation folks around special education before the short session kicks off, so they can at least begin to see what the needs are, how we can advocate, so they're having that visual image, the legislative agenda, and our lobbyists talking about this to help paint the picture. So the 17th is when we will vote on these 3 priorities, and then we will go from there. So Vice Chair, did you have any comments that you wanted to make?
Just briefly, the focus was really just on the short session and identifying a few things. If I was doing something for the long session, it would be more robust. And when we do that, what I would like to do for that process, if I'm in charge of it again, is get everyone's feedback kind of going in before we even develop a document. Like, we can work off some things, see if they actually pass a budget this year, that sort of thing, if we get anything. And that would be the process going forward. This, Dr. Taylor and I worked on last week for, just a short amount of time to kind of get some language and some focus. But I know some people, have other things and things I agree with that we did not put on here.
That is a great point, and I'm glad that you mentioned that. Sometimes I think we take for granted that everybody fully understands and lives in the world of long session, short session. Obviously, long session is each session technically is a biennium, so we've got 2-year sessions, and the first year is the long session, second year is the short session. And so they both still kind of play off of one another. The long session is always a lot more wide open, and that's, you kind of bring anything. Short session is a whole lot more, narrowly tailored. Over the years, it's kind of opened up and become a little bit broader, but it is, like Matt said, budget related, so it's typically budget tweaks for the budget that would have been passed the prior year. And in recent years, it's been trying to pass any kind of budget or smaller budgets. And for policy purposes, that scope is narrowly tailored down to whatever has crossed over from one chamber to the other in the long session. So that knocks out a whole bunch of bills. Unless, if you're presenting something new, it has some sort of fee or it affects the budget, then you can bring a new initiative. So I say that to say, kudos to your point, because it is, to have something that is more narrow in scope, and you're picking things that are a lot more likely to have some traction and be successful, which is ideal.
That's the goal. Dr. Hagerty?
Thank you. So I don't envy Chair Swanson and Vice Chair Hershey having to navigate this environment. I've never seen anything like where we are today, and so I just have to ask, in terms of where the legislature is in its cycle. So if it's the short session, well, if I should say it's the second year of the biennium, but the long session didn't adjourn, and a budget was not adopted in the long session, can you just, and maybe I hear it, but I just need to hear it again, what the process will be when they do come back? Will there be passage of a budget from last year? Will they just pass a new budget that's only, June or like July 1 going forward? And if so, what happens for the rest of the months of this year? Is there anything left in the last year of the first year of the biennium that needs to get done, or do they just sort of erase it and go straight to year 2?
Those are all very great and reasonable questions for which we don't have answers that we wouldn't just be inventing. I think we are in a bit of an unprecedented place. And I think this is part of what seeing what happens tonight and how that shakes out is going to impact what happens going forward. Because we operate, so that they passed a law almost a decade ago that put us under a continuing resolution. So the state budget's probably funded at about, I don't know, 75-80%. So you have a lot of functions that are just rolling.
It continues to fund those critical recurring dollars. No new money, but just whatever the recurring funds were from the prior year
So,
budget, that it maintains those levels.
it's sort of like, what could they do? And all options are on the table. They could come back and pass something that goes retro through part of the current year we're in for certain things that they prioritize. They could mainly focus on passing something that looks forward to the second half of the biennium. They could come in and, if they can't come up to a big deal, go to the world of passing several small packages that, again, look back or look forward. I would venture to guess most everything will probably be looking forward, not a lot looking back, but it's all speculation at this stage. I think the leaders have already decided, let's get through the primary, and then we're going to sit down and come up with a plan. So that's what I'm saying. It'll be speculation at this stage, but it's all possible.
From a practical standpoint, when they come back, they really only have, post-primaries, they really only have about a month, realistically, to come together and do something for the end of the long session. They might come in for a few little things. I don't see a whole lot of, profound work getting done during that time. I think you're probably more likely to see, other than some interim kind of committee work, I think you're going to probably see a lot of behind the doors ramping up for the short session. So you'll see them come in, do an adjournment, and then we'll have a couple-day break probably, and then they will come in for a short session.
The other thing, just to make it more complex, in recent years, they've kind of had the pattern of pre-conferencing the budget, as they call it. Instead of going through the process where you see a Senate budget and debate it, take it to the House, debate it, and then go to a conference committee. And as we've typically seen in the long session and the short sessions of late, they've just pre-negotiated that, and what you see is what you get. It's an up or down vote. But again, we've never been to this place where they've gone into a short without having passed something in the long. So let's say they do a comprehensive budget. Today I couldn't tell you which path they're going to take. I can tell you which path they've been taking in the short session, but not in these circumstances. So it's been a tricky time to figure out exactly what the go forward looks like.
Just a very brief follow-up. So I guess what I'm trying to weigh in my mind is, there's one argument that the legislature could just continue on with their continuation budget and then start fresh with the short session adjusted budget, right?
Yeah.
But there's an awful lot of things that go into the House and Senate budget packages in the long session, special provisions and such, which may not even be short session eligible on their own. Would they have to be introduced individually, separately, and then somehow worked into the new budget? Or would there be any reason to try to save or salvage any of those?
Well, because those provisions are part of, it's all one bill technically.
Yeah.
Because that bill has fees and provisions that affect the budget, it makes the whole vehicle
Okay.
eligible, so you can throw in whatever you
Well,
want.
and that vehicle is a conference report that's eligible too. So
That's-
if they
that's
if they
exactly
take
right.
that budget vehicle from the long session, anything in there is fair game.
Yeah,
Okay.
so
Yeah.
a conference report, which you guys, if anybody's not familiar and you'd like me to explain, I'm happy to do that. But it's still just a bill that is the result of a bill passing through one chamber, the other chamber changes it, so then it turns into a conference report because that conference committee, both sides have to come together and figure out, all of their differences. That continues to be a conference report, and that specific type of bill is automatically eligible. So, yeah, that's why a lot of times you'll see those special provisions and everything kind of being, people are trying to throw everything into the budget.
Yeah.
If they want, a prayer of getting something through in the short session, it's always a shoo-in if it goes in the budget.
And therefore, if that's the vehicle, that comes out for an up or down vote. It doesn't go back through in a process where you can make amendments on the floor.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Of course. Any other questions? Ms. Evans?
Thank you. I would like for us to include voucher language in this, and the voucher language that I'm proposing comes from the top, the very intro of the 2025 long session legislative agenda, and the sentence reads, "The Wake County Board of Education also calls upon the North Carolina General Assembly to prioritize public school dollars to fully fund public schools, not private school vouchers." It is directly related to funding, it is directly related to the budget, so it would be applicable to the short session. And Wake County private schools got $56 million in 24-25. I'd say if that went to Wake County Public Schools, that would be a benefit to our district. Thank you.
Any other?
And I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, if I may.
Sure.
It could go in the top paragraph of this.
Consensus, too, about that language.
Sure, I just wanted to add that I don't have a preference of where it goes. That's all I wanted to say.
Gotcha, thank you.
And Mr. Chair, I will say, because we're not going to take this up until our next meeting, we can do a little bit of divining after we see what the legislative results are. And that could influence, where we would put that in the bill. So I don't know if we have to decide it today, but I think we'll have a really good idea about
I
how to include it.
agree, and I think I'm trying to get a point of that. I think
Yeah,
for a
it's okay.
second, because you and I worked on that language
Yeah.
last year, where if we were to just say the Wake County Board of Education calls upon the North Carolina General Assembly to prioritize public school dollars to fully fund public schools. I think that's also, depending on what the primary results look like, I might also say the same thing without poking the bear and getting bit in the process.
So, Mr. Chair, what the Vice Chair and I can do is, after the elections, we can kind of see where we think things may land, and we'll, take any feedback that's given today, and then we'll fashion that and certainly share that with board members so they can have an opportunity to look at it before we come back to the 17th meeting.
Because I think there's interest in talking about it.
And if you guys have, if you want specific feedback, and we're always happy to come back, because if you said you think it looks very different regardless, on the other side of today, and how we're thinking about this, whether that be that we have more certainty and we can give you better advice, or that things look very different. So I would say if you do, in the meantime, if you want some feedback after today, please feel free to filter through chair, through the superintendent, and we will provide that feedback for you, and are happy to come back in to get into a more robust discussion about, the implications of what you guys decide on.
Ms. Rice?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question in reference to what we were just speaking of about vouchers. Are you in any position to tell us what other districts are looking like across the state with unification around that? Or, because my point and my intention of asking is, one, as Chair Swanson has said, poking the bear and knowing what wars we can win and not win, but finding where is the unification of that you're seeing across the state, and how is that really impacting?
I will be frank, at first blush, I'm probably not in a position to tell you that. On a district level, I'd have to do a little surveying and probably lean a little bit back on you guys and see kind of what you're hearing from your counterparts. In the legislative world and government affairs world, we haven't really been, that's not something we have heard a lot of chatter of, that there is a lot of talk or intentions to do that in a significant way, where we're hearing that multiple districts are thinking of moving forward. That could also just be because of our political dynamics right now and not really wanting to speak on that too much. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at.
So Ms. Rice, conversations that we've had in the large 12 districts, as well as our RESA districts that are talking about legislative agendas, are coalescing around the top two that we have in terms of teacher compensation and special education. And so I've seen those clearly in every legislative conversation with other districts. I would say that's probably about 25 or so districts, including our RESA in the large 12. And so you'll probably see the same kind of language in legislative agendas across the state. What we have in terms of the school nutrition piece, that's more singular to Wake County, but that is where everybody is coalesced around those two. We see, as they've shared, what we believe is movement in the General Assembly on these two topics. And so we're also working with DPI about how we can craft language around the special education piece. Part of that is there's a difference between districts in terms of asking for a percentage increase versus asking for a percentage or an increase based on high-need students. And so there's a difference in terms of what may come to school districts when it's a percentage increase versus high-need students. We're going to have the majority of those. So we want to make sure that as districts, we have the right kind of conversation about how that may come out. But that's kind of what we believe are the two that have a real chance of coming out, teacher compensation and special education funding. And that's what we've seen across most districts.
Follow-up comment. So perhaps it seems like it's possibly safe to say around getting our students not to flee from public schools, that maybe we may need to think of more robust ways to keep the students that are in our communities, in our schools, and continue to adopt better policies that are stronger aligned with parent partnerships and being a little bit more inclusive, so that they won't be so quick to run to a voucher program. So that's my comment.
Dr. Green, Dr. Joe, or Ms. Gordon, do you all have comments? Dr. Green?
Yeah, thank you. I think, it's already in the first paragraph, there's already the language about, that we are mandated to serve all enrolled children regardless of income, health, or ability. But I think, that special education piece is really a very vital piece of the justification to prioritize public education funding. Because realistically, other options are not providing that kind of education to that population. And so, we need to give our kiddos with special needs the education that they need. So, the number one reason for them to support public education.
Great. Dr. Joe, or Ms. Gordon, do you all have any? Well, I think we have some great marching orders to move forward, and we'll be in touch with some revisions to send over. And between, if you all have any other revisions, please make sure you get those over to us so we can incorporate them to the best of our ability. And we will vote on this on next Tuesday, well, the 17th, which is 2 weeks from today. Dr. Taylor?
So, Mr. Chair, the last thing I'll add is that we've had conversations about the types of meetings that we want to have when the short session starts. And so, at the behest of the chair, we'll be reaching out and creating that team and identifying individual and groups of representatives to talk with as we go into the short session.
It's imperative that we pass this first so we can then have those productive conversations, because I don't want to meet with them without having this legislative agenda taken care of, because we have a lot of work ahead of us. So thank you.
I should also just add, so you can be on the lookout for that, we push out an update, a pretty comprehensive update of the results and kind of implications for that. So depending on if it wraps, before midnight or things are drug out for a few days could dictate when we get all of the information pushed out. But we will have a report sent out. I think 2 of you, whoever, I might need to change that around a little bit, but I know you were the primary contact. We get to put 2 of the recipients on there, so if you guys want to share it with your board, it's a pretty straightforward report, but it'll be something nice for you guys to have at your fingertips right away, so you can be on the lookout for that.
And then just one thing to keep in mind, the threshold with which a candidate can request a recount is 1%. So it's just a thing we keep an eye on tonight, because that could also drag out how long it takes to get certainty, depending on how many races within that 1% threshold. And how close they are, frankly, my personal experience is usually going to be in less than 100 votes for it to make a difference. But,
But in areas where you have 12 to 13,000 voters,
it's not,
outside the realm of.
it's a reasonable possibility.
Yeah.
And I know I've spoken with Caitlin and Matt about this, that after the election, there will be drafting a legislative PowerPoint presentation that you all can take back to your BACs versus having the 2 of them come to 9 different BACs. It will be a teachable document that will be shared out as soon as we get through this primary as a way to engage your constituents around the work ahead of us. So.
And if there are certain things that are unique to your constituency, we're happy to chat with you about that, or modify or add to suit your needs.
Thank you all. Looking forward to getting some things passed.
Yes. Thank you. Good luck with the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you. All right, so now we will move to our public engagement plans for the 27-28 enrollment plan. So Mr. Carosa, Ms. Boyer, welcome.
We don't want to keep you long on this topic. It's time to start thinking about the 27-28 enrollment plan. So thank you for this opportunity to just provide a quick update. So today we really just want to highlight how what we've heard from previous efforts is impacting how we're going to do our public engagement differently this go round. In addition to outline the process and a projected timeline for the overall process, so we can get your thoughts on that before we formalize that. So just to jump in, as you all may know, this is my favorite website of all time. So we have already started to update it with some of our new information, and we will continue to do so throughout the planning process. As a reminder, it's a one-stop shop for anybody in the community, families as well, if they're interested in learning more about all of the elements that go into the enrollment planning process. It's all curated here and cross-linked from other sources right here on this one page. And we thank our communications department for all of the effort and for letting us have this special page. So just as also a reminder, this aligns with the strategic plan, particularly the public engagement elements with our family and community engagement strategies, particularly aims 6 and 12 regarding our district communication structure and our community engagement efforts. The rest of the planning process obviously aligns with several of our operational efficiency goals, but that's not the point of today. So we also have our policy 4150, just as a friendly reminder. It contains the 4 pillars of student achievement, stability, proximity, and operational efficiency. So as we do engage the public in conversations about how future enrollment plans may impact them, we do make sure that we talk about these 4 core areas. And again, as a friendly reminder, they have very prescriptive definitions in policy that may or may not match a, let's say, dictionary definition that someone might be more familiar with for these terms. So we do make sure that we share this information as well. We still have our informative video up on the website if anybody would like to watch that video to learn more about this particular policy. We've gone over this for the last couple of years, our sort of 6-step process. I was trying to figure out a way to have the loop come back around and restart it. It gets real ugly every time I try to do that. But we are still technically working on step 6 of last year's plan while we're initiating step 4 of this year's plan. So we'll kind of talk through that a little bit later. But we just want the community and for you to be reminded, everything really kicks off with that forecast that you'll receive at the Facilities Committee meeting next week. So really why we're here today is to talk about lessons learned. What we've heard, particularly over the last several cycles, is that our families and community members want to participate before recommendations are made. They want to be able to have multiple opportunities to do that, as well as methods of providing that feedback, again, before recommendations are made. We appreciate that, and that actually helps the planning team if we have these conversations before drafts are released, because they inform the draft-making process. They also appreciate having their unique perspectives weighed and considered during this process, as much as we don't always meet eye to eye, if you will. A family or community member might ask for a particular thing that the district isn't in a position to be able to move forward with. We can at least understand that perspective and figure out what supports we can put in the middle to bridge that gap. And one thing that came up a little bit more prevalent in last year's process is that the one invitation seems to fall a little flat. They'd like more frequent reminders about when things are coming, so we're going to change our processes this year in terms of making sure that we're not just using community messages, we're using our principals, we're using our community partners, and that we're also giving just-in-time notifications in addition to those please put this in your calendar type invitations. So we are going to change our protocol a little bit to engage more frequently when we're inviting people to participate. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So how are we responding to these concerns? So for the early and the before, as a reminder, particularly with respect to new schools or major shifts in an area, we do try to go out into those communities a minimum of 2 years prior to them being included in an enrollment plan. As you may be aware, Morrisville High School is the one new school that is scheduled to open in the 27-28 cycle. So we've already been out there once last year. We'll go out again this year, and we'll have additional opportunities for engagement this year since it's a little bit closer. That 2 years out time period is helpful, but people really participate the year before. So we make sure we have multiple opportunities in that 1 year prior. We also will make sure that we have the live feedback opportunities, both in person and virtually. We've not done that in this phase before. Usually if we have an in-person session for a new school, we kind of count that as it, and then we move forward maybe with the virtual general session as an overview. This year we're going to double up. So we're going to have a live in-person session regarding Morrisville High School, a live virtual session specifically regarding Morrisville High School, maybe 2-3 weeks later. So if someone couldn't join us for the in-person session, they would still have that opportunity, in addition to our having translation services available at those types of sessions. We will continue to have our asynchronous feedback opportunities as well. As you know, we rely heavily in our department on thought exchange, but we'll also make sure that we guide people to any type of opportunity for sharing information with us. The one benefit of using Thought Exchange and the assignment planning, not one, the one, but a benefit of using Thought Exchange and the assignment planning website that's hosted on the district website is both of those can be translated into any language that the participant prefers to use. And so that really increases access for our multilingual families. Another way that we're responding in terms of informed and invited, I sort of let this one out of the bag early. Not only will we continue to use our website and our community messages, that's our prime target for getting messages out to our community at the district level, we will also be doing direct messaging to the families that are in the impact areas to specifically give them targeted invitations to very specific topic conversations. And we will be partnering with our principals to make sure that they're aware, hey, some students in your area might be impacted, so here's some information you can have in your toolkit to maybe put in your principal messaging or to answer questions that come to you. We want our front line to have the information they need to support the process. We also will continue to engage our community partners. We have our new newsletter, and I'm going to forget the name of it, but it's our partners newsletter. Our community partners newsletter will continue to leverage that. We were able to do it for the very first time last year, so this time we're looking forward to using it more frequently. And Superintendent Taylor, anything we can do with your different advisory boards to get messages out, we will also take advantage of those opportunities as well. It won't happen until the fall, but we did get a lot of positive feedback about that specialized open house that we have once we get sort of in draft phase. Very well received. We will continue that process in the fall as well to make sure that people are informed about what's happening as well as feeling invited to the table to be part of the conversation. So with that, that just kind of rides us into our timeline. As I mentioned, this year's a little bit unique with our transition to Infinite Campus. A lot of our reporting timelines got pushed beyond what our historical patterns have been, just as we're learning our new system and the configurations and making sure all of the data is accurate. So the annual forecast, which is usually delivered to you in February, is coming to you in March. We wanted to make sure it was accurate and valid. So a lot of The steps 1 and 2 are usually completed before I sit here in March and talk with you, but we're sort of doing them all in tandem. So between now and April, almost everything in those orange boxes, those first 3 orange boxes will be complete. I know you're talking about the capital improvement plan a little bit more today, and so we'll pick back up when I see you again later in the process. So public engagement is the first step within phase 4, and so obviously that's what we're doing now. And again, as a reminder, the purpose is to capture thoughts and ideas that support the development of the plan. And I can't reinforce that enough. It's to support the development of the plan, not to react to a draft that's been proposed. So it's really to make sure we're getting information ahead of time so the planning team can think about unique community perspectives prior to drafting any recommendations. As far as the timeline goes, this one's going to be a little weak in terms of details because we do kind of keep a few of the dates private because they're in-person sessions with 75-person seats. So we have a targeted group of families that we invite to those sessions because of those space limitations. But the virtual sessions, we will publicly post all of those dates and have those links available on our website as well. We'll put them in our community messages, we'll put them in our partner messages, and we'll make sure our principals have them as well. We are going to start next week, will be our first session, and so I can share some information with you offline about that, but we can't have those be publicly announced because we just don't have the ability to support an open call to those types of sessions. But we will make sure you get all the feedback from those. We'll continue to use our online forums. You may recall we frequently use focus groups. We will continue to lean into that. In fact, our focus group volunteer form is already up on the assignment planning page. I noticed that about 5 or 6 people have already submitted since January, which is sort of the new cycle. So anybody who wants to put their names in there, we will add them to the list we already have. We never take you off. Once you say you want to help, we always will invite you to participate in the conversation. But these focus groups are really to have more detailed conversations or maybe even AI-supported interviews to get deeper into certain topics versus an individual statement. And we hear that a lot, and I'm sure you have as well. An individual thought, sticky note, if you will, seems sometimes to pale into comparison to being able to have a real dialogue about a particular topic. So we want to have both of those opportunities available. And again, I told you about the space constraints. So this is our proposed timeline for this year's planning cycle. It follows the pattern that we did last year, which was very well received by the community. It also gives us plenty of time to operationalize changes around that Thanksgiving holiday period. I'm just not sure if you're maintaining your normal first and third as we get deeper into the year, so some of those will be subject to change. But if we were to follow the pattern from last year, the goal would be to come back and see you in May to have an initial conversation about what should be included in this year's plan, and then we can pivot. If you come up with something that staff hasn't thought of, we can add additional information sessions and more outreach to talk about those additional topics. By June, we should have the majority of our public engagement from the springtime wrapped up, so we can come see you in either June or July. I know June gets tight with graduation schedules, and maybe perhaps the short session information that I just heard, so I'm not sure what your board schedules and timeline will look like, but we can come to you in either of those months to give you a report on what we've heard so far. And then that way, by September 1st, we're ready to come to you and provide an initial draft, along with any additional feedback we may have collected throughout the summer. We can then come to you in October. As you'll recall, we've added that as a 6-week break instead of a 4-week break. That gives us the time to build in that open house, which has been, again, very well received over the last couple of years, and I think it's critical to getting some additional information for you. We also upped our public hearing schedule to have it at that same October meeting. That way there's plenty of time for you and staff to respond to anything that's collected during the public hearing. And that, I thought, was very well received last year as well. That was a new thing that we did last year in response to feedback from a prior year, that if you're having your public hearing in November, isn't it too close to when the final draft is going to be shared with the board for vote? So we wanted to provide that space and time. We will continue with our public engagement summary report that coincides with this process, so you'll have that document that'll be updated throughout. You'll get your first copy of it in June.
Before we proceed, I know there are timelines there. I would just recommend that we utilize that June, because I know we're in conversations to do a July retreat, which
Okay.
would only be a light work session, no work session, just a very light.
Retreat work. Retreat work is not this.
So I would just recommend the June.
Okay, perfect. So I'll work with Ms. Allen to figure out which of the 2 meetings would be the best for a work session touch point.
Just want you all to get too far deep and then.
And then the November timeline, that gets us well in advance of the Thanksgiving holiday. And just as a reminder, just for why staff cares, if we approve it on the Tuesday before the Wednesday, Thursday, Friday of Thanksgiving, it makes it very difficult for us to get timely information to families. They end up waiting a couple of extra days because we just don't have a full staff and technology team during, and that's no dig, it's just the way the holiday works. So if we can get it approved the week prior, then that gives us that whole Monday through Friday to get things buttoned up, so we can go ahead and let families start participating in stability transfers as the holiday is progressing, and give them a few extra days on the end so that everyone gets their information complete before we break for the winter break. And so that has been very, very well received the last 3 years that we've done that. So I would just appreciate if we can continue to do that prior to the Thanksgiving, that full week. But we also are amenable to change as is needed by the board. Other than that, again, quick touch point.
Can I just add something real quick? I want to give a huge kudos to Susan and her team, because they do a tremendous job with this process, as you know. And it's all during a time that's really high traffic for their office. You know, you were just coming out of
Transfer window opened yesterday.
Yeah, the magnet window opened and closed, and now you have the transfer window, and many of you see a lot of those appeals. And so I just want to really give them, you know, a kudos, because not only does this work happen during the day, you're dealing with parent phone calls, they're also spending evenings doing these outreach sessions. So thank you for the time that they put in.
Absolutely, I would definitely echo that as well. And so I see some hands. We'll start with Ms. Gordon on this side first. Ms. Gordon?
I just want to echo what Mr. Caruso just said, but I also want to say you and your team have done an exceptional job of providing like thoughtful feedback. Not only that, but being truly dedicated to continuous improvement around getting the public engaged in this process, noticing when you need to change things, and just bringing it to us in a transparent way. Like, we're seeing that we fell short on this, so we're having to change it so that we are engaging more families. So I just wanted to comment on that and how appreciative that is to me. And to me, it sets the bar on how we should be engaging families thoughtfully and genuinely. Thank you.
Dr. Jones?
Thank you very much for doing this. I have a couple questions just because I haven't been through this before. Do you break down the feedback by district, by like our districts?
We break it down by the natural regions within the district, because sometimes your districts aren't exactly aligned with like the feeder patterns.
Right.
But you might have the elementary school and you have the middle school and someone else has the high school. So we try to do it based on the communities.
Okay.
So you'll notice that we use the area superintendent language as our sort of divisions. But yes, we'll collect it on the front end. Families will be able to tell us what region they live in, and tell us if they're Eastern, if they're Northwestern, if they're Northeastern, Central, etc. We can also look at the data as a whole, but we can also look at it in the community, yes. Because that's very important to us, is to recognize that some things are district level conversations, but some things are community specific.
Yeah, that's good. And what kind of education do you try to do with families before the hearings and things like that? To try to, like, I'm just trying to think about how we could get even more useful feedback by, if parents knew, you know, why we make the decisions we make, and you know, and what limitations we're facing, then we wouldn't get, you know, 100 comments that tell us to do something there's no way we could possibly do.
I'll send you a copy of some of the packets that or slide decks that we've used in our in-person sessions. That's exactly what the in-person and virtual sessions are for. They really start as an education and informative element. Information that we'll be sharing with you along the way is what we share with them. Here's what the forecast says. Here's where the growth is happening throughout the district. Here are schools that are already crowded. Here are schools that are capped. Here are the schools that are being built. Here are the schools that are being renovated. Yet you still have a big, giant, fat blue arrow on your side of the map with not enough schools coming until 2030. So let's have a conversation about how we can support you while we wait for your new construction to come. Or, hey, you're stabilizing. It looks like the growth map is showing that there's not a lot of new growth. We've kind of built out, for lack of a better term. So what's important to your community from a student assignment perspective now that we're not worried about opening a new school, but we've kind of
Caught up.
It's not even caught up, it's like now we can go, oh wait, when we did that, we didn't align the feeder patterns. Oh wait, when we did that, we left a multi-track year-round school that's not really full anymore. Can we come to that area even despite the fact that there's not a new school coming and see what the community needs from an assignment perspective? So yes, that's the entire purpose of this time period, is to get that level set understanding. We even have an informative video that's on the website that's actually been fully, not transcribed, but like it's delivered in Spanish as well, that explains the planning process. So that's what that assignment planning page is for, is to drop all those things, but more importantly, that's why we go to the community, is to start with that and then say, okay, now knowing that, and knowing you do or don't have a new school, or you do or don't have growth, what do we need to know about your community as we're thinking about our planning? And some of the information we collect this year, we won't use till 2829 or 2930 or 2030, but we don't let that stop us from asking the question and taking the feedback. But I'll be happy to get you some information from previous sessions so you can see what they're getting.
I appreciate it.
Ms. Rice, and then I'll come to Ms. Evans.
Thank you, Chair. Echo, I think that Susan's team is great, so don't want to let that go without being said. But before I even ask a question, I want to make sure I have clarity of thought of like where we are to even ask a question. So today really was about sharing some steps of where we're going, moving into it, but not necessarily diving into the student assignment piece today. I think we are looking at the other timeline, I think that you showed, where we'll come back and discuss that, which means we have time as a board to formulate our questions specifically around student assignment and then share it. Is that right?
Yeah, May will be when we have that conversation.
Okay, perfect. That's what I thought that I was hearing. I wanted to clarify that. And then, so therefore, I'm not going to ask you any of these questions that I have right now, okay? Because I do. And then the last thing that I would like to say as well, I would love that same piece that you're sharing with Ms. Jo, if I could have some of those snippets as well.
I'll send it to everybody.
So that I can share with my Talking with T. Rice, because I get these types of questions all the time, and I don't always have the answer, and I need you to give me the answers to the test.
Happy to do that.
Thank you. That's it.
Thanks. I just want to make sure that I heard you correctly. The Morrisville High School is the only new school that'll open for 27, 28? Okay. That was it, because it's not in here.
No,
And I know we're not sharing specifics, but I thought because
yeah.
I thought that
It'll be a key factor in recommendations, but obviously when we come in May, there are other areas that we need to work on despite not having a new school coming to.
right.
Okay.
That will most definitely help the schools out in Mr. Hagman's district, especially those high schools, Greenhouse, Panther Creek, Green Level, can definitely use some relief with Morrisville High School coming online. So.
And you've been having these conversations for a couple of years now, so they're anticipating it. So it's good that we've already started this feedback process.
And to piggyback on that, just as a public service announcement, just in case people are paying attention, that also generally will motivate some feeder pattern adjustments as well. So sometimes just because it's a high school is opening doesn't mean we won't also come with recommendations at the middle or even elementary level to support community. You were very supportive in that process that we did in the Holly Springs area and the Fuquay Arena area last year as we were opening schools, in a new area, saying, hey, we heard from the community, just get it done. Don't keep coming back and chipping away. If we're going to have feeder pattern alignments, let's try to get those done as soon as possible versus, I think I've seen Mr. Hagerty being reassigned every year for the last 5 years is kind of what my brain is thinking.
Just one follow-up, please. Since we're talking about different changes we can make, I just need to also ask a question. With this feedback that I may have for May, is it safe to say that I can include feedback about where some of our current schools are right now and the distance in which they're still having to travel, to put that in there for consideration?
Absolutely.
Please do.
And okay, great, and hopefully for some changes. My community is requesting for those to be some deep considerations, as they have been fair with compromising for 50 years and being shifted so far away outside of their communities.
Traditionally, I know in the past, there's also been 3x3s or small groups that Mr. Carosa and Ms. Pulliam will
How about your individual areas?
will convene, so therefore those questions can be raised, deeper dives can be taken before the process goes there for those questions to be raised there and at the table for the public.
Absolutely.
So be on the lookout for that information, those dates as well. Any other comments, questions? All right, hearing none, thank you both for the work that you all are doing, and I'm not sure if Mr. Croson will be staying at this one or for the next one. So we'll go into the Ligon Magnet Middle School project option recommendations. So that will be Taylor, Mr. Strickland, Mr. Rosa, Mr. Burnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chair Swanson and board members, today our administration will share details on the Ligon Magnet Middle School project. Our goal today is to review these three options that have been considered and give feedback on what our constituents have shared with us. We know that the Ligon building holds a significant importance for people throughout the Wake County community. Like so many communities across the South, school desegregation requires that we confront the stark realities of school inequities in the various forms that they had taken and from that forge a new school landscape for our children. And as with most communities, the brunt of this new landscape development landed on black communities and on schools, black schools. Ligon was no different. And we know in those 50 years since 1971, we estimate that less than 10 of those black high schools now survive as comprehensive high schools in North Carolina. Now, there are 5 in the large municipalities, and that does not include Wake. As we make decisions to address school needs that meet the modern requirements, we then look at an existing building and determine if the structure in its current conditions with renovations and within a specific budget will meet our needs. Do we consider options that may lead to the removal of the school? Such has been the case with Ligon. The historical impact ranges from the first students in the mid-50s up to our current students. So many people, black, yellow, white, brown, have a history with the school, and that is why those voices matter. Staff will share what we have heard from our constituents and their thoughts, questions, and their feedback. Staff will share options that have been reviewed and are available for board consideration. One question by constituents asked, why only 3 options? And I've heard that from quite a few people. And I will say that is the right question to ask. But I also understand that when considering project options, there are going to be multiple perspectives that are considered. And as we work through those options, they become a part of a reduced number of options that are available for consideration. And in this case, there were 3 options that came out of that. Constituents also asked questions about swing options and what considerations were made beyond a mobile village that you will see in 2 of the options that we will bring to you. So staff can certainly provide feedback on geographic locations, central to the current school, and swing space availability. In their reviews, there were also conversations with St. Augustine's University and the feasibility or usability of buildings on their campus. The review did not lead to this as being a viable consideration. So that is one of the questions that I was asked as to whether or not we had reached out to St. Augustine's. We had done that. And so that is information that we have as well. We realize that listening to constituents is key to projects such as this. While those steps were taken to garner feedback and have conversations with alumni and families, I quickly realized we needed to do more and include as many people as possible. Members from the Ligon alumni were a part of a select group to give feedback early on in this project development. However, I know that selecting members from an alumni group can yield one set of responses when there's 20 people, but a different group of 20 people can provide a completely different feedback. So with that, as you all know, I devoted time from November through the early part of February so as to provide additional listening and feedback opportunities. And I can tell you I've heard from alumni, faculty, parents, and constituents from all over the community, and those sessions reaffirmed how important I know this issue is to our community. And so finally, I want to share that regardless of the option that the board chooses, I and others recognize the importance of magnifying the legacy of Ligon. We can't say that enough. With that, there is now a Ligon Legacy Committee consisting of over 20 constituents and individuals from across the community, ranging from alumni, faculty, students, and parents that will do the serious work of developing the Wake County process worthy of a Ligon legacy, again, regardless of the option that's chose. And I want to reaffirm the committee will have identified goals and a timeline as we work through this project. The good news is that we're not at the design stage for any of the options. And so when committee members that reached out about the Ligon Legacy Committee, that was one of the questions that they had. And so I've reassured them that there's going to be ample time for feedback from them. And so again, the goal is not to direct the design process, but to provide real and relevant feedback on how the legacy should be honored in whatever that chosen design is. And so with that, I will now turn to the team for the remaining time to go through the presentation.
So by the end of the session today, we will have provided you all with some background information on the project options. We'll also talk about and share information about feedback received from the numerous public engagement activities. And at some point in time between now and the board meeting tonight, we'll be given a superintendent and staff will be given a recommendation. So with our strategic plan, we wanted to show the alignment with operational effectiveness, AIM 17 and 18, which are always aligned with facilities and operations. AIM 17, continuous high quality and equitable access to facilities and technology. AIM 18 is prioritizing safety upgrades, and that includes facilities, safety plans, and cybersecurity. Under family and community engagement, AIM 6 is to provide clear, accessible, consistent information about opportunities available to families. AIM 7 is to empower those same families and communities to partner with us in their children's learning and school environments. Then AIM 12, to build strong relationships among staff and families and other community organizations as we share resources and promote well-being. I'll provide some of the background information. Dr. Taylor talked a little bit about this. In 2021, there was a study conducted by a third-party team that looked at the Ligon campus. At that time, there were other schools that were looked at as well. I think there were 54 total. The study was actually completed and produced in 2021, and Ligon was identified as having reached the end of its useful or serviceable life. And then following that assessment, the board approved a project with a budget of $141 million in order to bring the school up to current standards. There were preliminary visioning sessions that were held in May 2025 to identify some of the themes and priorities as the design moved forward. And the architectural firm selected to do that work was LS3P, and they created 3 different construction proposals, which were shared with the Facilities Committee in December. Those project options, first of all, number 1 was to renovate the existing building. That would have been renovation of the building as it sits, where it sits, with students and staff moving to a temporary campus that would be proposed to be built on top of the existing ball fields. Option number 2 would be to rebuild on the existing location. It also would include the erection of a temporary mobile campus on the play fields, and then the existing building would be demolished and a new facility would be built back in that same location. Then the third option was to build a new facility on the ball fields that would not require the construction or erection of a mobile village. The new school would be built on the existing ball fields on a level at least comparable to Martin Luther King Drive. And then once that school was built, the project was completed, the existing facility would be torn down and new ball fields would be built in that location. So I'll give a little bit of detail about each of the options. Option 1, again, to renovate the existing building. As you can see from the map, phase 1 would be to erect that mobile campus on the playing fields adjacent to MLK Boulevard. That would be occupied, And then the renovation work would be proposed to begin on the existing building. The timeline for this particular option, once the students were moved to the campus and the ball fields were restored, would be about 4+ years, and the projected construction cost would be $102 million. Keep in mind, as we shared earlier, there's a total project budget of about $141 million, so the construction costs are about $102 in this option. The additional costs are made up by such things as fees, permits, furniture, equipment, things like that. Option 2 would be to rebuild an existing site. It too would be in phases, with phase 1 building the same temporary mobile campus down adjacent to MLK Boulevard. Once the students move into that, the existing building would be demolished and a new building would be built in place. And then once that was completed, the mobile village would be taken off the campus and the ball fields would be rebuilt on MLK Boulevard. That timeline was projected to be around 5 years or so, and construction costs there would be estimated at $147+ million. And then option 3 would be to build a new facility on the ball field site. Phase 1 would be to build a new school on the existing ball fields, again down near MLK Boulevard. Phase 2 would be to demolish the existing school, and then phase 3 would be the installation of the ball fields where the old school currently stands. This phase is estimated to take about 3 years or so, with projected construction costs somewhere in the range of $121 million. And with that, those are the options that were discussed. I will add that Dr. Taylor did mention to you all that we did have some conversations about swing space with St. Aug. I had conversations with him as recently as last week. As we went out and looked at that site and evaluated it from many different viewpoints, we just came to the conclusion that that would not work for this project. With that, we want to share some information about the feedback from the public engagement. And as Susan does this all the time and is well versed in it, we engaged her to help us with this process. So
I'm a consultant on this process. As Dr. Taylor mentioned in his opening remarks, it was really about expanding the voices for the essential partners for this process. And so what was sort of taken on in that November to now timeframe was some digital outreach in addition to information and listening sessions, and they even went so far as to provide direct access to leadership via email and I think even meetings in the parking lot. So the digital outreach was to capture those community-wide priorities through interactive crowdsourced feedback. The information and listening sessions allowed families, staff, and community members in separate sessions with separate emphasis and focus to learn about the construction proposals, as well as to, walk up to the mic and share their specific comments. And then, of course, any emails or phone calls that were captured by district leadership was captured as well. You want to kind of see by the numbers is kind of how I like to live. So the Ligon project page has been established for a while. As of February 25th, it had just under 2,000 views. I did check the video that was created to support this project has had about 400 views. So for a singular project, those are not bad statistics. The thought exchange that was opened had 159 participants post 129 thoughts. There were 2 in-person community sessions with 35 speakers. So this is where I have to pause. To provide anonymity, no one was asked to sign in. So there wasn't anybody kind of clicking to know how many people actually showed up at the event. So the only measurable thing we have for these sessions was just how many volunteered to speak. So there were 35 speakers across those 2 sessions that were targeted as community input sessions. The one that was labeled as a family session had 15 speakers. Again, this is a much smaller number than who actually showed up to listen and hear and maybe even support speakers. The family session also was branched over into a virtual option, and that one we can count participants. There were a total of 40 participants in that online session. The staff session that was held in person, again, way more than 11 people showed up, but 11 people did choose to speak and provide comments. For those that were held in person, the team did an audio recording and then transcripted all of the remarks, and so that'll explain how we were able to use some AI support, because we could take those transcripts and import them into a system to go through and analyze the comments. And then the email submissions totaled 23 by the time we were asked to pull everything together. So for the thought exchange itself, I know it's small, it's intended, because this isn't the important stuff really. I mean, some of it is, like who participated, how they identify, but it's really getting to what individuals said. But you can see that at least 54% of respondents identified that they live in the central area, which would be somewhat near where Ligon is located, it's in the central area. You also see higher numbers, maybe 19% in the northern Wake area, historic draw area for the magnet program for this school, so that makes sense, you know, if you're looking at the numbers. As far as ethnicity, people are allowed to not respond, and that's fine. So 29% indicated they preferred not to respond, but you can see the breakdown that there was a majority of white participants on this one, that at least by self-identification, there's no way to know the prefer not to respond. And then as far as how they identified coming into the thought exchange, this is not an add up to 100. They can multi-select. So if I'm a parent and I have a student at the school, if I'm a community member and I'm also an alumni, we added in those features. So you had 67% of respondents indicating they were a parent or custodian of a current student. So clearly this is a current enrollment voice, if you will. None of the current students went on, which doesn't surprise us at the middle school level. Families don't always encourage students to participate in our online activities. 5% indicated that they were a current staff member, 19% indicated they were an alumni or former student. And I will be honest, from the remarks that were made, it is hard to tell if they are Ligon High School alumni or Ligon Magnet Middle School alumni, right? So there's a mixture of those two. So we have to be careful with how people are identifying as alumni, because certainly they could represent 1982 to present, or they could represent that earlier time period when it became a high school in the region. And then 20% indicated they were community members. So didn't pick, and they might have double picked, right? But they did clearly say, I'm a member of the community. Within this thought exchange, it seemed by count, and the themes that came up were educational excellence, minimizing disruption, having modern facilities, preserving the legacy of the school, and having the community involved in the process. The total number of comments coming in, educational excellence was clearly the front runner in terms of total number of comments. But when we look at the star ratings, while it stays on top, minimizing disruption kind of equals it. Community involvement actually goes from being less numerous to middle importance, right, in terms of the rankings here, and then the modern facilities and preserving the legacy. So again, these tend to represent voices of current parents and those obviously that were registering as alumni. The top three thoughts that came out of this particular thought exchange was keeping the students on campus is important, maintaining opportunities for the current students, the magnet program should be preserved throughout the renovation, and current and future students in their learning environment with some add-ons on there. So you'll see this as regardless of which side the comments were coming on in terms of if they were in favor of a particular option or in favor of a particular perspective, everyone agreed that minimizing the disruptions for the current students was important. So that's just something for you to take away, is that regardless of where they fell on all of these topics. This is where I want to say, at this point, we took those transcripts and those emails and we digitized them and loaded them into a separate part of the Thought Exchange software that's a powerful tool that we have access to called Discover, where we can now input data from other sources and have those same AI analytics applied to it. It won't be as robust because it's coming in sideways, so you're only going to see 3 themes, right, instead of 4 or 5. But the 3 themes that came out of all of the in-person sessions, mostly hosted by Dr. Taylor and Mr. Strickland, and the virtual sessions and the emails and all of that. So none of this is the digital thought exchange. This is expressly the feedback collected from those live sessions. Educational continuity had 50% of sort of the range of themes, and this is in terms of participants mentioning it. So it's a slightly different analysis and assessment than we're used to. About 24% of participants focused on the magnet program, and then 24% focused on the historical preservation. The participant groups that were identified by their voluntary admissions, through the transcript evaluation, was they were either staff, family, alumni, or community members. The perspective and voice. So when we looked at the one, so then we discreetly looked at them, kind of to Ms. Jubb's question from my other presentation, do we break these apart? So when the staff thoughts were analyzed individually, you can see across those 3 themes some representative comments and statements, and that the primary concern was ensuring the healthy environment for teaching and learning, emphasizing that space, modern facilities, and minimal disruption to classroom activities would be preferred. However, acknowledging that the traditions and the historic structures are important, so not necessarily weighing in on how to accomplish that, but acknowledging that those are important. When the families of current students participated, again, you see some representative thoughts here. And their key concern was in highlighting the importance of a stable learning environment for their students. Great value is placed on the robust magnet offerings, particularly the arts and specialized electives, while also expressing a range of opinions on preserving the school's historic elements. Here's where we start to see comments like, legacy is important, but is legacy a building? Right? So people taking a particular stance on the conversation. And then when we get into alumni thoughts, again, this is where it's a little bit difficult because it's hard to tell unless they expressly said, I am a graduate of Ligon High School in their statement, which I think we found one. Most people didn't expressly tell us which type of alumni they were, so that made this a little bit harder. So maybe in the future we can check a box. But you'll see some variations on preserving the history definitely gets illuminated here, as well as making sure that we preserve the modern legacy of the electives and so forth. So again, these are difficult to tease through and figure out that's why we're here, right? Finding the right path forward. Community thoughts, then, this is where people didn't specifically say they were a family member, didn't specifically say they were an alumni, but rather mentioned something about living in the area or being a member of the community. And here's where you start to see a little bit different about, you see in the historical preservation, a very prescriptive comment about Ligon High School main building is preserved to honor the Southeast Raleigh Black history. So you start to see some very specific comments about the importance from that perspective. Here you'll see a little bit about the student perspective, but you start to see Ligon's role beyond just student enrollment. Right, you see that in that first statement here. So you start to see a slightly different lens on the situation. So I kind of let the cat out of the bag on this one, but overall, regardless if the focus and emphasis was on preserving the historical legacy or focusing on the future needs of the school, every participant, or at least the vast majority of participants, could agree that at least minimizing disruption to students should be taken into consideration. And so that's where the feedback has brought us. And Dr. Taylor, I don't know if you want to add more to it since you were physically at most of the sessions.
I mean, I think you hit it.
Okay. And with that, I turn it back over to the rest of my consultancy is complete.
So, Mr. Chair, with that, we can open it up for questions. We can go from there. So I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. I'll start with Ms. Edmonds and then Ms. Corbett.
Mine's very brief. Mark, can you say, Mr. Strickland, can you say more about why St. Aug won't work? Can you give any detail or?
Lots of reasons. So we took a team out there. In fact, many of us went out there multiple times. We took a team out there of FD&C, CNS, maintenance and operations. The area superintendent went, the principal went, and we had other academic staff out there. That's a big campus, but they don't have the buildings and the classrooms aggregated like we would need to run a school. It's also a very large campus, and it was quickly evident that trying to transition from where the classroom building was, at least the main one, the largest one on one end of the campus, all the way to the gym, or all the way to the cafeteria, or to the other art spaces, was just going to eat up a lot of time. And, you know, we went there with high hopes that day, but after we made the assessment there, we just felt like we couldn't make it work.
Thank you. My question is about, you briefly stated that I think one of the options would not bring the building up to current facility standards. Can you say more about what are current facility standards?
I may ask Ms. Sharp to jump in, but basically, out of the classrooms that are on campus right now, I think 75 to 80% of them, or Kathleen may want to jump in, don't meet the current standards that we have for space standards. Not only are they small, so they're under the program square footage that we would have for middle school, they are shaped, many of them, like a skinny rectangle, and it's not conducive to the learning spaces that we build nowadays.
And so while they wait to respond, I'll add to that as well, that when we talk about a modern standard, that means that if we construct a new building, these are going to be the requirements that DPI would have for a building. That doesn't mean that an existing building can't be used and be undersized. So that means, if you've got classrooms that are there, you do renovations, and there's a limit to what you can do based on, there's a load-bearing wall or things of that nature. But when we talk about modern education standards, those are going to be guidelines and information that's given out by the Department of Public Instruction, classroom size, whether it's elementary, middle, and high school. And so the current facility, while it doesn't meet those new standards, it doesn't mean you can't have an educational program in the building. So I do want to be clear about that. And so I'll let you all talk a little more about.
Catherine,
We get, you want me to? So we go, when we start any project, we go through and we do a comparison of what the existing condition of the building is based off of our new space standards. So we have educational space standards that we follow for all of our schools when we do renovations. We also have educational specifications. And so what we do is we go and do that comparison. And what we found at Ligon is that much of the rooms are undersized. They're around 700 to 715, somewhere in there. And like Mr. Strickland was saying, they're very elongated. And so to have, back in, when we went to school, we all sat in rows and the teacher sat at the front of the room, which was fine. Today, we do a lot of collaborative learning. So we do a lot, the teacher has to be all around the room. And so what we try to do is create more of a square classroom instead of elongated. And for us to try to get this, to bring those classrooms up to standard, if we took a wall out, they would just get longer. They wouldn't get wider because we can't make them wider. They would just keep getting longer and longer. So it's just not conducive of the way that they teach today. So that was the reason why we went in and decided to go this route. Did you want to speak?
Yeah, it's all over the walls is the other challenge.
Yes.
So they're just concrete blocks, and you've got structure sitting on that, and then to try to enlarge 30 classrooms would be very physically challenging.
And the building is very long.
And it's a magnet program.
The building is long. It takes a long time to get from the front of the building to the end of the building. Yes.
If I could add also, what we noted before was numerous exterior doors, so from a security standpoint, that was an issue. Circulation was an issue too, as far as trying to move about within the facility in a timely manner. And currently, they often go outside and come back in to avoid the congestion in the corridors. Also, ADA was a consideration, where there are numerous areas where we really just don't have that access, and that affects bathrooms, that affects stairs, and generally circulation too.
Ask a follow-up, please. Glenn, Mr. Caruso, I heard you say, and it's a magnet program. Can you say more?
Yeah, so the magnet program obviously has additional educational opportunities for the students. So sometimes the rooms need to be upfitted in a certain way so that they can accommodate more students in those electives or whatever type of elective it is. So generally, we'll want to make sure that we have that. The older buildings, it's tougher to upfit in that sense. So by providing a brand new building, we can get it right from the start.
Question. Looking at those pictures, obviously, like the footprint of a building, whichever whichever option we look at, looks smaller than what the footprint of the current building. So, is there a goal square footage, or like are we reaching for the same comparable square footage in the building as what we have now?
Yes, so we follow the middle school space standards. We have a 936 capacity space standard that we follow. So we have what each classroom size is going to be, what the cafeteria size is going to be. So that is what the new building would be if that was the direction.
So it will be bigger?
It will be bigger, yes.
35,000 square feet bigger and 3-story classroom wings, and that's why it looks smaller.
Yes.
And I think just to add, the discussion that's been taking place with the land, not with the space, I believe, based on some conversation I've had with some of the alums back in that original class, that the land was the school was already at a deficit with the amount of land that was already given, so that's why the school's footprint is not as necessarily big as some of our comprehensive middle schools. So that plays a factor into this.
And I think that's a good point, that I don't know what those standards were in 1954, and I doubt if anybody in the room knows, but Mr. Chair, that's a good point, that it is a 17-acre site. And so when we think about even building an elementary school, I think we're going to generally start at around 24 to 27 acres.
Yes,
Yeah.
27.
Right, and so we already know from that perspective, the space that's normally needed is not there. And so this design would take that into account, structure-wise.
I just wondered, I didn't catch it. How many additional square feet will it be?
35,000.
It's going to be around 200,000 square feet, and I think it's currently like 165, 170.
I thought you said 30.
It's
Roughly about
35,000
Yeah.
undersized right now.
30,000 undersized, okay.
Sure, I'm going to try to keep it very brief. Don't start with me today, I'm going to be good. I'm just trying to keep it down to 3 questions, if that's okay, and move as quickly as possible. I'm trying to get my notes here, so I'm looking at, can staff kind of walk me through, make sure I frame my question right. Let me frame my question. Can staff kind of walk me through the extensiveness of the search that was done for the temporary building space or building location? I'm trying to get a better understanding. I've heard about Shaw, but I'm just curious if you can walk us through. I'm sorry, St. Augustine, my apologies. Ooh. So sorry. Got the HBCU space, but just the wrong one. But I really would love to hear you guys walk us through how extensive was your search for looking for an alternative space for the children, because, and I can say this, I should have said this preface before my question, because the alternative learning space, of course, is just as important as the finished product. So I do want to acknowledge that, and I know that's important, but I definitely want to know what was the extent, the extension of your search. Can walk us through that piece really briefly.
Go ahead. You can go first, then I'll try.
So with any renovation, we first look to see if we can find a swing space site, because that is the best way to do a renovation, is to get the kids off the school campus. The challenges we have with the middle school is it's a large amount of students. I think Ligon may be about 1,000 at this point. And so we just don't have swing space locations for 1,000 students.
That are approximate.
At an approximate, that's exactly right. So then our next step is we always look to see if we can flip a site, because like we don't want to disturb. We want the least disturbance as we can for our students. If we don't flip the site, and again, the flip side is when we leave the students in their existing building, we build a new facility on the ball fields or wherever, and then we flip the kids into that and then demo the existing building. So that's the next thing we look at. If we don't go that route, then we end up with a multi-phase project where we're in the building for, it could be anywhere from 4 to 5, almost 6 years, where we're just touching little spaces everywhere. So with Ligon, unfortunately, being inside the Beltline, we don't have any swing space sites large enough to move the students in. So
We don't have any.
we don't have any swing space sites. What we would have to do is move them into another, we'd have to build a middle school and move them into a new middle school, then renovate their school, which we have done that a lot. But unfortunately, we're not doing that kind of construction inside the Beltline. So unfortunately, Ligon did not fall into that category. So it's been very challenging for us. So this was the first time I've ever even looked at a college to try to move them. And like Mr. Strickland said, we were very excited about it. We really did go in there thinking this is maybe an opportunity. And it was going to be a challenging site for the students. And
So those were the steps we took. I don't know if Glenn wants to.
Yeah, the St. Aug, it was going to become a security issue, because you're going to have students moving from building to building, just like a college campus, which is exactly what it is. And being at the middle school age, we didn't think that that was going to be appropriate for the students or staff to really maintain over time. And then as you look at swing space, and you talked about, doing little bits of pieces of renovations on site, and it drags out longer in time, it was certainly going to impact the instructional piece, and that was one of our main priorities, was try to maintain that as much as possible. Because it is a magnet program, because it draws families from all over the county, we wanted to make sure that we were able to keep the enrollment at the school healthy over time so that it could have long-term success.
Thank you. Just staying on this question really quick, how many potential sites were actually evaluated? So I know you shared the process of what it takes to do a thing, right? And I heard you say we couldn't see anything. I was just curious about commercial sites, the charter schools. So with all of Wake County, as large as we are, and I know we're in the southeast Raleigh area, but a little bit, so it's safe to say there was no other viable options.
Well, we try to stay, what's the distance that we try to stay from? Is it 12 miles or 15?
Under
at
15,
most?
yeah.
It's less than 15. So you're looking at that circle, and you have to look at the schools and the facilities within that circle. So the only viable option could have been, well, it wasn't even viable, but the only option that we could look at and actually go see was the, not Shaw, but St. Aug's.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the other part that I saw when you guys were sharing your data, you saw that a large proportion of the families were in the northern part, right?
Just on the thought exchange.
Right, on the thought exchange were northern families, is that right?
19%. So they were
Right, 19%, okay. And that's from our magnet program?
That's the main draw area.
Okay, the main draw.
And I will say, just to be fully transparent, it's open to the public.
Right.
So someone could have just had an opinion and participated too.
I get it.
Yeah.
And so, okay, so maybe this may not make any sense, but it's still a thought that I'll put out there, since we're talking about building spaces. If I am correct, I believe Ligon Middle School is 60% magnet. And I know I'm correct. It's not as I believe. I know I'm correct. We're 60% magnet and we're 40% base. And so my thought was there ever a consideration of the majority of where our students are coming from considered to find a space? Because I know when we're renovating other schools and other areas in district, we seem to find a space for those children to go. And so I just found it very challenging that we could not find a space for these children without building a $7 or $8 million module space for these students that happen to be in this particular historic neighborhood to go, when we seem to find a space when we build everywhere else.
That's a good point. We did consider the Spring Forest campus, which is adjacent to East Millbrook Middle School. Again, because of the draw area being up that way, but the size of that campus would not hold all of the students all at once. And it would then, again, get in the way of offering magnet electives to students throughout their 3 years of the curriculum. So
Okay.
we couldn't use that site.
Okay, I'm trying. I'm gonna shift to the next question so I can move
Just for
on.
point, I'm aware that our two other middle school projects that are being contemplated at East Gardner and North Gardner are going to have to swing on site as well, because we just don't have middle school swing space or even high school swing space at this time big enough to accommodate. They're going to have to go through the same types of challenges, from my understanding.
Same thing with West Millbrook, did a similar project to what option 3 is here, where they built on the ball fields while the students stayed in the school, and then they switched over.
Essentially, middle school construction is a challenge for us to find a spot for.
So I think even with hearing that, I would love to hear what the facilities department as a whole, knowing that we've got schools to renovate, schools to consistently build, what is the plan of action that we are taking? We knew that this project was coming. We knew what the limited spaces was, not last year, not 2 years ago. We knew this over 3 years ago that it was coming. And so I'm just really curious, when I talk about the intentionality of what we're doing, what is the intentionality of what we're doing if we say that our words are least disruptiveness for children and focusing on them? If that is the case, What are we doing? What do we need to do as a board to give you the leeway to think outside the box to make sure that our students are having the least disruption as possible to be in buildings that are standard and code so that excellence in education can actually happen? And so I'm a bit disappointed of where we are with this Ligon project, but I do want to move on to my next question before I get dinged, if we've got time to go. But I'm concerned about that, Superintendent, and I'm hoping that as you continue to lead this district, that we take that into strong consideration. What I am hurt about, and I hate to put feelings into it, but what I'm disappointed in is that it's not happening with Ligon. That's well-deserved. And so that moves me on to my second question in reference to the conversations that we've had about displacing our children. Make sure I just had my question. Sorry. We talked about the options and the options that we have. One of the things that I gave concern for in the beginning was we were told, and as Superintendent even just said today, that we have not closed the options, right? That it's not set in stone about the design. However, when I constantly hear about the options and when we talk, it basically is set in stone. So help me understand why there were no more options other than what facilities said. Option 3 is the only option that's in your own paperwork, in your own slides that you showed, that there were no cons to option 3. There were no mixed matches of option 2 and 3. There was nothing. It was all option 3, all or nothing. And so to tell us, of reasonable thinking people, that it's not set in stone, there are no other options, but you present to us that there is only one option, of reasonable thinking people. And not only that, we never framed the other options as if building a cultural space or remembrance space was a part of both options. We only framed it, you only designed it in your presentations, that only with option 3 did you talk about a cultural space that could be a part of it. I think that was unfair to our public, and I think that it caused a portion of our trust to not look genuine. Because we should have stated the building structure or the cultural pieces within it, the legacy parts within it, could still be applied. I know it was verbalized, but it was never seen in our presentations, only with option 3. And so my question to us is, with the options that you have provided with us throughout the duration of this process, never switching up the options, even though you keep saying they're not set in stone, what other options will you give us today to keep this building on the top of the hill and make sure our students have somewhere they can be to keep learning flowing while the school is rebuilt? Because the options that we see are families that don't live in this neighborhood and will not necessarily get to utilize the school. And I'm being very transparent and I'm being very open, not on my own thoughts, but on our own data. So how do we preserve that, Superintendent? How do you bring us different options than the 3 that you said? And we shaped a narrative that this is the only option. Not by the district, not by communities doing. This is what we did as a district. And I take ownership of that because I'm a part of the district. We shaped a narrative that option 3 is the only option, and there are no other options. How do we correct that narrative?
So, my first response is that obviously the idea was to keep the site where it is. One of the things that I was transparent with when I had my sessions is that it was not about saying that there are no cons to option 3 and that we're making that good because it's the favorable option over the other. And so that is something that I actually shared with them, to say that With any option that you have, you can always find something that is a con. And so when they went through those options, and with option 3, when you look at the pros versus cons that were in option 1 and 2, you didn't necessarily have any of those in option 3. And so things could have been highlighted to say that athletic facilities won't be on campus and you're going to have to swing somewhere else, but that wasn't there. In terms of keeping it at that site, I think that is a decision that was made prior to most of us, in that if there's a limitation to swing space that's available based on mileage, then that does limit the decision that you make about where you will be. When we say these are the 3 options, now the board can direct staff to come back and do some other kind of option. That's what I meant when I said that you look at multiple things, and when you begin to draw those down, that's going to lead you to a narrow number of options. And so when there were discussions about options 1 and 2, the meeting that you and I went to was just simply a discussion about option 3, and that's not to preclude that's not somewhere else. Other options were not available. And so out of that option, when they said option 3, because there was a concern about the legacy if the physical building was not there, that's where they talked about, the legacy walk, the pavilion, things of that nature, which was a part of option 3. And so the thing that I've reaffirmed to the public is that it really doesn't matter which option you choose, that the legacy piece has to be something that has to be prominent. And I don't want to make assumptions, but I would relatively assume that if it were option 1, then the physical building is there. And then those alumni that don't want to see the building go away will say that we've got the legacy, the majority of what we want to keep is the physical building. But now we recognize in hindsight that regardless of whatever the option is, there's got to be something that leans heavily in on the legacy, whether it's the existing building or something else. And so, when we talk about what it is that we see as viable options, we can come up with 30 or 40. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be viable when we look at those. And that's how we ended up with narrowing it down to these 3, saying that if you renovate the building, then you remain there. And if you don't renovate it and you want to construct something new, these are the 2 options that you have. The site that will be at the current, where the current building is, that's new, one that's adjacent to that. And so, to me, I know that's how we arrived at those options. I don't disagree about the legacy piece, that in hindsight, we all recognize that that is something that needed to be lifted up at a much higher level, regardless of which option was chosen.
My third question will just be pointed to our chair and colleagues, and that is it necessary that we vote tonight, considering we really don't have any options other than the 3? And they have not done 3-on-3s to say, what else could we do? I don't want to prolong anything as necessary as possible, but I am deeply concerned with what has gone forth and the fact that we're not choosing to honor a space that people in the community that lives there is asking for. They asked for one simple thing. They understood that a new building would have to take place, but they asked could it stay at the top of the hill. They compromised with that. They didn't want the building to be torn down from the very beginning of talks. And so they compromised because they understood that students need good learning spaces. So we as a board, can we compromise? Can we give a community that usually never gets to have a voice, but usually has to be the one that always compromises in these situations, even where we are now 50 years later? Millions of the world have always had to compromise their choices. Can we build the school at the top of the hill, manage what the cost and stuff may look like, and narrow it down and give these community folks what they're asking for, to build the school back at the top of the hill, even though they don't want to tear it down, or they understand It needs to be a new building.
I'll respond to that after the rest, but I do want to raise a point. If this project, option one, is chosen, which is over budget, which school is impacted off the CIP?
So option one is not over. Option two is the one that's over budget.
So,
But that's what we're talking about here.
so
Option one is within budget, option three would be on budget, option two would be the one that would require additional funding from somewhere else. We looked at that, we looked within the CIP to identify opportunities to do that. It would mean a couple of things. It would mean that we have a project that fits the time frame of the funding that we're given from the county, and that project would need to be delayed, but there'd also be a cascading effect that other projects would typically be delayed.
what is that project?
That would be Cary High School.
And I will not support Cary High School moving off track when Cary High School has also fallen off track and has been moved due to other schools, which is also a need for a school. So that is where I draw the line in the sand for me. I cannot afford, nor can I allow the Cary High community who has been waiting for a new school to push. So I understand the feelings and where we are with this, but I know, I'll pause my thoughts.
Can I ask you a question, Chair? With the option two that we're talking, option one that we're talking about, can I ask the question to facilities, if that one is still, as option one is still under budget, what is the difference in the option one piece versus the option two? Because in option one, I thought too, it still would be in the temporary mobile site that has to be built, but we're still saying that's less, and I know we're saying renovate, but what is the difference between building a new, still having to put the temporary mobile campus there, and what is the difference in rebuilding the new of the school? What money that you're coming from that's so exacerbate from option three to go in it? So help me understand that, because that doesn't make sense to me.
You know, I can explain that with option one and option two, the difference is about $45 million in 4 and 5 years. So option one.
But why?
Well, with option one, because you're doing a renovation, part of that time frame is constructing the mobile village that they would have to swing into, so that would have to be constructed first. And so there's a timeline in terms of how long that would take. I'm not sure what that is.
It's in option one and two, the mobile village is the cost that makes it so expensive. We would have to take everyone in the school and house them in mobile units on site. We looked at recreating the spaces as much as we could in terms of gymnasium space, dance space, band, all of the spaces that they currently have. The site is really small, and so there were a multitude of challenges with getting enough mobile units on site and also handling the traffic issues and student drop-off and pick-up. But that's the difference.
And option one also is just a renovation, not a building of a new school. So you're just bringing some of the classrooms up to date, some of the facilities, fixing a roof and stuff like that. So you're not getting a full facilities overhaul. So not all of the spaces will get up to code. Well, they'll get up to, what, no?
No, they won't.
They won't get up to code. So you're not going to have the same educational experience with option one as you will with option two or three, because you're getting that new facility. And you're going to have to come back in several years to readdress other issues that aren't fixed within this particular project. So you're looking at a second disruption for families down the road where we have to come back and revisit the campus.
There may not be a timeline for that, but
There's certainly not something planned within the next 7 to 10 years.
which is what happened to Cary High. But I want to keep with the order that I saw. So I have Mr. Hegarty, the Vice Chair, Dr. Eames, Ms. Joven, and Ms. Edmondson. I have a couple of comments.
All right, so when you present us with choices like this, you're asking us to take a lot on faith. And all of these budget numbers you're asking us to take on faith. And unfortunately, my experience has been that these estimates are not always accurate. And my lived experience on this board with another high school, the Morrisville High School, has shown where we've had recommendations and estimates presented for completion of a project. And then, once the design phase starts, all of a sudden, costs are very different, obstacles are very different, things that one would expect could have been foreseen, because the land hasn't changed, the property hasn't changed, but now the estimates and what is planned on the land suddenly has changed. So it's hard for me to take this on faith based on what we went through with Morrisville High School. And I want to come back to that high school for a couple reasons. Here, one of the things that we saw with Morrisville High School, why we couldn't build the high school there, was that even though we'd come out and we'd looked at the land and done our feasibility study, we were told the topography was a challenge. It was challenging topography. The slope on the land was such that we couldn't build the high school as we intended. I've pulled up a topographical map of Ligon. The topography on the Ligon site is much more extreme than the Morrisville High School site. The option that's being recommended, moving the students to the ball fields, all the athletic fields, well, they're all flat and level. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. But then it says you're going to have middle school athletic facilities up on the hill, which would mean grading and flattening and somehow changing this hill to where you could have flat athletic fields. And as I look at the footprint and the space occupied by Ligon's current athletic fields, I do not see how they will fit on the more narrow northern part of that footprint to rebuild the existing fields, especially with that slope. So I have some real concerns about the feasibility of Phase 3 based on the topography of the site and the ability to put, already, we've talked about the Ligon site, it was said here in this committee, does not have the same square footage of a traditional middle school that you would build in Wake County today. I think trying to shoehorn some of these facilities into space that is not suited for them while still complying with all the regulations that we will have for green space, non-permeable surfaces, your carpool, queuing lanes, is going to be a lot more challenging than we're being presented with here. And I think that will impact the costs. I think putting the high school on the bottom and then flattening that area, I think there's going to be some complex drainage and stormwater issues we have to consider. And so I really am reluctant to accept this Phase 3 plan as the best option based on just looking at the site, based on what we saw at this other high school. Now, I won't say too much about it, but I want to, echo what Ms. Rice has said about the history and the culture of the site. And what bothers me here is that this exact same designer, LS3P, did another project for a very historically similar high school, West Charlotte, which was Charlotte's historically black high school. And they went through at our State School Board Association with a presentation that detailed everything they did in terms of historical research, cultural outreach, and all the work they did to preserve the history of that school. And they were able to do it in a new space, right? They didn't have to preserve the building. But none of that took place here. And the representative from LS3P, when questioned on it, presented to me in this public meeting information that wasn't true because I was at the meetings that she presented at. Back, I guess, May of 2025. So I have a lot of concerns about the process that has gotten here to date. Now, we're in a pickle, we're in a bind for a lot of the reasons that were said. But I worry about being brought selective facts and selective information to build a case toward a preferred outcome. We've heard a lot about specific middle schools. We've heard a lot about not wanting to, inconvenience families, and I get it. there's probably not one family that would go to Ligon that wants to go to a different site, that wants to be inconvenienced, that wants to go further away. But Ms. Rice asked a question that, if you think about it, was pretty prescient here. She's asking, where are these students coming from? If the student base is 60% magnet, a lot of them are coming from the northern area and that northwest area. But the only swing spaces that you mentioned were in eastern Wake County and southern Wake County. If you want an option for swing space that would save the district millions of dollars and would not threaten any development of the CIP in terms of delaying Cary High School, you've got Parkside Middle School right there at the site of that former Mooresville High School site, which is already being graded, already under construction, and already being built at a middle school, which would serve the local neighborhoods of the largest base of Ligon Magnet students. I'm not saying that's the best answer, but I'm saying when you consider options, I don't know how far you really looked. So, you know, I have concerns about the process to date. I don't have faith that this Phase 3 site as planned is going to be ideal. You know, the project won't be finished probably until, you know, I'm long gone and just complaining from out there in public comment in the audience. But I just wanted to raise those concerns here before we make the choice, before we have a vote. Yeah, I don't have a better option for you, but I have some real concerns about where we are.
Mr. Hagley, if I could respond to a couple of those things. The comparison with the Morrisville High School site in Ligon. Ligon is an existing site. We know what we have there. Morrisville High School site, facility staff didn't find out about the amount of rock on that site until after we purchased it and we were planned and budgets were set. We didn't find out that information until way after the fact. And as we did the due diligence on planning, it became quickly evident that we needed to pivot because of the expense of developing that site. So, you know, those two comparisons, that site had a lot of rock to it and this one doesn't. I just wanted to make that point. I mean, we felt like we were way over budget on that side. As far as budgets and projections, I think the track record more recently on our budgets and what we're bringing projects at are spot on. And then the concern about the elevation changes at Ligon have been discussed many times with that lower field being brought up with engineered fill to a level that's equal to or level with Martin Luther King Boulevard.
But that's not the hill. That's the lower elevation.
Right.
What we're talking about is how you would flatten the higher elevation. I mean, you can see.
It would still be tiered. It would still be tiered, yes.
The fields would be at two different elevations.
Yeah.
So the softball field would be at one elevation. There would be considerable change up to the soccer field.
Oh, no, I said my piece.
I'm going to go a little backwards. Having athletic fields tiered is not uncommon on our high school, at our high schools. It's just, you make do with the land that you have. I'm going to push back on a few things, and I would object to delaying a vote on this. We have had the options for 2.5 months. We had 3x3s. Within the options themselves, on option 1, it says preserve the J.W. Ligon history and legacy, renovation designs, can elevate the history and legacy. It says that for option 2. Everyone's had ample time. It was stressed. Bring all questions to staff, everything you have. And I did, in my conversations early with the facilities team in facilities committee prep meetings, I asked and pushed on swing space. I asked about could you do a sixth grade center? Would that be feasible? So you could then create enough, so then you could swing students off. I thought we would end up somewhere on phase 2 based on kind of the early, like what would be the cost of a mobile village. And then I pushed staff because it was clear that what we needed was some projection on the 3 potential options because we did not have dollar amounts. I agree with Mr. Haggerty, we have to do a better process and that we need to learn from this process. We did things a little bit backwards. I asked about why can we not preserve the gym and auditorium and build on that side. I have asked all of these questions and pressed staff on it. And I've had time to do it. I went out and with Dave and Elizabeth to the site and looked at how the building would be up. And it was very helpful to me to see that it is going to be very high up. What's the side street? I always forget it. Haywood. It's going to be very noticeable along the side street of Haywood. It's going, the top of that building on option 3, which I am certainly supporting, is going to be level with the current building now. It's going to be a presence. And we as a board have the opportunity to say, here's what we want to see in a new building. Here's how we want to do it. There's a committee, a part of this, to ensure that we have, like if we have, I asked them about it, even if it's a ceremonial entrance on Haywood, similar to the auditorium entrance now. And that may be a way to preserve some of that original building site. So I went through all of that process for me. And the last thing I'll bring up, because I don't want to keep going too long, what it came down to for me was also the $26 million, $27 million of spending on a temporary campus. We have a huge amount of needs in this county. We have a bond in which we are going to be asking for a significant amount of money to be approved. How do I justify to families anywhere, including in communities that have really been hurt by property tax raises? I mean, that is on my mind. How do I say, hey, we're going to spend $26 extra million and on something that's going to be there for 3 years, then it's going to go away, and oh, by the way, please pass this huge bond because I have 25 other schools. I have Rock Quarry, which I have been pushing hard on to get, to Piney Plains, which the chair has equally been pushing hard on to get done. And we have Cary, and we have all of these projects. And I wish we had a bigger swing space. That's part of the conversations and the great work that staff is doing to facilitate that going forward. It's unfortunate we do not. But, you know, in order to build those swing spaces, what would we have lost in the last 10 or 15 years? Because you would have had to build out a swing space and taken a project off. And that's a hard ask to do of, you know, when we've had to build. I mean, how many new schools have you, 20, 25, just since you've been on the board? I mean, it's so many new schools. So it's not like we've had money sitting there to say, hey, let's build these swing spaces. It would be great if we did, but I have to work under the reality of what we have. And I'm being consistent because I also voted for moving Morrisville High School as a way, because of the cost of it, and as a way to save money. And that's where I'm at on this.
Chair, if I may just add a comment about Parkside Middle School. Not to mention the distance from downtown, because it is quite a distance and it's in a congested area in Morrisville. Transportation, you know, provides bus service not only for magnet kids but for base kids. The magnet students share transportation with other downtown magnets. So we would be asking our transportation to have a set number of drivers just for Ligon families to transport them back and forth to this swing site, and we just don't have the staff to be able to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll push back, but you have an existing building that you would not have to build, as opposed to building temporary buildings and mobile campuses that you'd have to tear down. So, you know, yeah, there'll be costs in some areas, but there'll be fewer costs in other areas. You know, again, the design costs of building a new temporary space when other existing spaces exist, I mean, you can't ignore that. How much are the temporary spaces? How much would the Phase 3 temporary space cost?
The Phase 1 and 2 with the temporary space estimated at $26 million.
Okay.
3 doesn't have one.
Sorry, I apologize.
I can come back to you with the follow-up, but I want to keep with the order, so I'm going to go to Dr. Ing, Dr. Joe, Ms. Edmonds, and then I have a comment, and I'll open up for the second round.
And I apologize for going out of order.
Thank you. I think I have a little bit of a different spin on things, just kind of from my own experience, having lived in a home at the bottom of a hill, and having construction done uphill of me, that stormwater is a real concern of mine, and the runoff on the surface during a construction process is a real concern of mine. And so, you know, I'm only looking at it from the 3 options that we have. And the fact is, you know, do I want to subject our students to a mobile campus on the bottom of the hill during a construction process whereby there may be increased runoff and potential for flooding, possibly, and all the things that involved, versus building the building on the bottom of the hill where we know what we are contending with in the construction process that I'm hoping will take care of or alleviate some of the runoff issues, and at least while the process is going, that the students will not be subjected to the possibility of flooding during that construction process. So the point for me is, you know, do I want to have the uncertainty of flooding during the whole process of the building, or not? So it's a big question on my mind, in addition to some of the other issues, and I just want you guys to also think about that. And then the other issue, you know, that I've been hearing, you know, the emails from a lot of parents is, you know, of course, you know, being that it is a magnet program, you know, I'm concerned about what the impact of it is on the magnet program if we were to look at a mobile campus that many parents don't want to be in. So those are the factors that are kind of in my mind right now. So I'll just let other people speak at this point.
Dr. Joe.
I had 2 questions. One was, if we looked at, I'm trying to think about option 2. So the 2 questions are related to that. One is that if we do the mobile campus, is there any way to do some sort of mobile campus in a way that it can be broken down and then used to replace some of the mobile units that we're having issues with across the county?
So I can address that. We have a surplus right now of mobile classrooms. That would not be a benefit to us financially or.
What do you mean we have a surplus of mobile classrooms?
We have classrooms that, in some cases, aren't being used. They're being used for storage units, things like that. We are trying to go through the process of removing those, and that's an ongoing effort.
Right, but I imagine that I'm just thinking about like Olive Chapel and the mold issue that they're having. Like, if we have a surplus of mobile classrooms, why is that still an issue? Like, why haven't we traded those out yet?
So those units are being used And if anything, we would be rebuilding mobile classrooms there.
Also has to do with the location of the unit too, the access points. And so if you have other mobiles blocking that unit, you'd have to remove those units to replace or remove that unit. And because the school is overcrowded at this point, we don't have that ability or space availability to address that concern. From what I understand, we've addressed the issues and concerns at the mobile in question at Olive Chapel.
Okay.
So.
All right, but they're still like 40 years old though, right? I'm not getting
It's-
things.
The average age of our mobile units across the district are over 35 years old.
Okay. So I still have the original question. But I mean, like, why would we use these new mobile units that we use for the mobile classroom to replace some of those? I guess
So
this.
Dr. Joe, I could add to that, and we'll certainly let LS3P respond to the mobile campus, but the way that would be constructed would not necessarily be units that you would want to remove and put on another site. So it's not like mobile units that you see now that are individual units or on multi-classroom.
Okay, the way that, I'm sorry, sir, but the way that you have envisioned it now, that's true, but we could envision it another way. And that brings me to my second question is there a way to come back to the option to design to bring it more into alignment with the budget? I mean, I know we're trying to build schools for the future, not for the current, and I do understand that. But also visiting some of the newer campuses and stuff, there are definitely additions that are made, there are definitely decisions that are made that are optional. And so is it possible to revisit the design to bring it under budget?
Let's say, so either building, whether it's option 2 or option 3, is satisfying the program.
Right.
The program space is going to be similar. And multi-story for both would still be the case, because again, we want to consolidate the footprint as much as we can.
Okay. I'm not going to ask all my questions because I don't want to take up a lot of time, but I hear Mr. Haggerty's point, and thank you for the Parkside Middle example. But with respecting the community, I can't imagine going to the base students, even though they're the 40% versus 60, and asking them to go to that area temporarily. And I don't know the answer. I
mean, they've been doing it for 50 years. Sorry. My apologies.
Well, not if they're base at Ligon. I mean, do you know what I mean? Like, I understand what you're saying about the magnet program and that students for historical diversity nodes and such have been sent outside of Southeast Raleigh to these other areas. But if that's something we're trying to correct, I just don't know. I can't imagine how I would think the community would be upset, but I don't know that. So it's just a question that I have, not to be answered this second. It's just something I thought about. And then, obviously, Ms. Rice, you've heard way more feedback than we have. But with the alumni feedback, at the hearing that I went to, it was the first one after the new year. And I was there the vast majority of the time. I think I left at 10 minutes before the end time. There were people that spoke that self-identified as alumni, and not Magnet alumni, but from the high school, who said they supported option 3. I didn't take account, and I was just curious if the feedback you've gotten from the alumni, if it's more for the one of the other 2 options.
I don't know if the chair is allowing me to answer. She's asking me. So what I've noticed is when we're left with the choices that we're left with without other options, it leaves you to just choose what staff is asking us to do now. So they're taking the option that they can get versus we as a board shaping the option that they can have. If we're saying it's not set in stone, we hold the opportunity to correct some wrongs. We recognize that some of the things that we're hearing today is not fair. To Mr. Hershey's point, I've asked these same questions of our facilities team on our 3-on-3s and all that stuff. I've done the pushback, I've done the ask the questions over these months, but I'm getting the same answers. And so from my understanding, we as a board hold the option to change. They just don't have any options. We have not provided them with options, and they've been depending on us to come back and say, no, we don't want this, go back to the drawing board. And we have that option, and they're waiting on us to do it. And that's the feedback I've been getting back. That's the feedback that I got on December when I did it before I went out. With over 100 people there who were raging, angry, and mad that school was not staying on top of the hill with the options that I shared. They were not in favor of that.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
So
Mr. Chair, one of the things I'll say, and I want to talk about the options that are available and the possibility of seeing more. And I think the staff has done the exhaustive work of trying to identify swing space. And so when you talk with alumni, I think they've all come to the conclusion that a new building is necessary, whether they, even if they don't like the idea of losing the original building. And so there are many that say, we would like to see it on the top of the hill versus in the adjacent spot. I think everybody, the people have coalesced around the idea that we know that's necessary. The major difference between option 2 and 3, beyond that $25 million or $26 million for a mobile village, is if there is a swing space that we need to do option 2, what are the options that are there? And so looking in that geographic zone, we just have not been able to identify that. If you go to a different area, if we talk about Parkside Middle, that is also the concern that, 40% of the school, which is the base, has to travel there, and that remaining 60% that's magnet, while a substantial a portion may come from there, they're going to be in different places as well. And
They're reasonable to Wake Forest.
right, and so they kind of come from all over the place. And so that's where I know that while it may seem as though these are the limited options, I think what it comes down to is swing space availability is really the difference between phase 2, or option 2, and option 3. And that whatever we do in terms of a swing space, the concern is always going to be, what does that do to the magnet population? Because one of the things that the parents said to me, that if you do a renovation and we've got to be out of that school, basically what they said, if we have to go to a mobile village, then we're not coming. And we know we're going to lose that. And we accepted the fact that the magnet numbers would go down. But once the new building opened up, eventually we would anticipate that those numbers would come back. Wouldn't be overnight, but at some point they would come back. And that the least disruption would be that option 3, where you don't have to do anything to the existing program. And so I think that is the biggest difference that I see, that without the availability of the right kind of swing space, and even if we had, it would be great if we had an existing building within that range that we could swing into, and there really wouldn't be any disruption to the program. But now, nothing available that meets the need for a swing space within the range that we're talking about, and then a school that would be too far, that would also put a heavy burden on the base population. That is what I essentially see the difference between these two. And again, alumni, from everything that I've seen, they've accepted the fact that a new building is the right way to go. But that is the biggest difference between option 2 and option 3. We see it as a swing space, and you guys can share more about your thoughts on the swing space, but I think we've had that conversation and see that as, I think, the most difficult lift in terms of finding a space that's adequate.
I just want to add something, because we've mentioned, the magnet population, but this also impacts the base students, because they get the magnet programming at the school as well. And so when you go to a swing space and you're not getting the instruction that you've signed up for, the orchestra, the band, the art classes, all those electives that they have for those children, the AG classes, you're not going to get that in that swing space, then that impacts all of the students, whether they come from 2 miles away or they come from 20 miles away. And so that's why staff has led to feel that option 3 doesn't impact that instruction, and that seems to be the one that we would prefer more.
So I just want to make a couple of comments, and then I'll open it up for the next round. And so, I mean, this is a tough decision. Anything that we do is a tough decision, whether it's dealing with a renovation project, whether it's passing a budget that may be even tougher. This is what we've been elected to do, and I know Briar Cliff is one that's being renovated, that's going to be renovated on campus, that's going to have some challenges because of, well, price rise, because there's not a swing space in Western Wake County that I represent to have swing space. So a lot of the options that we're facing in Western Wake is swinging on campus, which increases the price and takes away from the work that could be done. I read through the emails. I was at Ms. Rice's event. I was at the superintendent's, and I was looking through my notes here. I heard about the concerns about being in a mobile village or a mobile village. And I understand that. And I learned at that event that I went to a high school in Guilford County, Eastern Guilford High School, in 2008 that burned down. Eastern Guilford High School was an older school in rural Eastern Guilford County. My parents went there. My aunts were the first class to ever enter that building in '77. And the school was burned, caught fire in 2008. And with that, there was option, there was displacement. Talk about teaching and learning being disrupted. You had 6 ninth graders in Jamestown, GTCC. You had some in all over Guilford County. And just like this, the community came together and we were in a mobile village for 2 years while they watched the campus getting built. And in that particular moment, I was my freshman and sophomore year at that high school. Concerns being in a mobile campus right now do not look like the same concerns than they were 15 years ago when I was in high school. The concern was about how do you keep the legacy of Eastern Guilford High School. It's a notable high school. Terrence Holt, Torrey Hope are alums there. Their aunts were outstanding basketball players. My father went there. His was the only class of '81 was the only class that really made it all champions, statewide championship. So talk about the history that's there. And all of my teachers that were there were relatives and went there. So we had an opportunity, again, being in that mobile village, to number one, watch the school being built. Number two, helping shape in that legacy of what Eastern Guilford High School should look like. And one thing that we were able to do, based on numerous conversations, was if you look at the new school, the seal of Eastern Guilford High School, it has 1977 when the school was built and 2010 when this new class was able to come into that building. When you walk into the school, there's a picture of the old school. So the legacy of Eastern Guilford High School still lives with all of us who matriculated through that school. And these were tough conversations as well due to the fact that you had folks who taught there, went there, wanting the school to remain as is on the property. And Mr. Burnett, I learned, was a part of that project. No, who would have thought that? But that school there was not on the original, it was on the original land, but the new school does not sit where the old school sat. Still on the land. So talk about the changes in how we move and maneuver. I think those are all tough decisions. I couldn't imagine what that school board went to during that time frame, but I know they were elected to do what was best, to figure out how to ensure teaching and learning took place, figuring out how to keep families together. And when we look at this, we heard that a lot of the families there did not want their students to be in a mobile village for at least 5 years. Teachers that spoke, principals, not principals, parents, students. So I understand their concerns, but I also understand that the historical significance of this property too. I get that. I don't know what it's like to live through a segregated school. I went to an elementary school that was a segregated school that my grandparents attended, Sedalia Elementary School. So although that school does not necessarily set the original school, the cafeteria that was the old school was still there. So I'm wondering, I know that these options are not the perfect options, but I know that we have a due diligence to take our feedback, have these conversations, to figure out how do we move best. And when I read through the emails from the PTA, from the athletic booster, from parents, teachers, community members, the things that I've read and that I've heard that's a common theme is less interruptions and keeping teaching and learning to take place. So whether that is option 2, option 3, I think that is, we're dealing with the cards that are being dealt with us. And we have an opportunity to rectify a wrong, make the school look as if telling that story of Lincoln, highlighting the alums that went through there. So that was the piece I wanted to raise, and I know we have 6 minutes, but I'm open to continuing this dialogue so we can come up to a consensus, because I don't think it's beneficial to the community, the school community, to continue to delay this. I also don't think it's going to be beneficial to those families who are trying to determine, do I continue to keep my child at Lincoln, or do I find another school? Because that also impacts the allotments that teachers have. So we talked about the magnet programs that are there. These, based off of dollars and enrollments, are connected. So I want us to get to a consensus to the best of our ability. So I'll go to, I'm sorry, Ms. Gordon, I don't know if you spoke on this first round or not. But
I did. I was one of the first people with questions.
Gotcha. So I'll go Mr. Hegarty, Ms. Rice, Ms. Gordon, and for the second round, if there's anyone else, and then the vice chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll defer because I've been talking about this issue for several years now. I will say in regards to the health of the magnet school programs, one thing that's always brought to our attention is the health of our other magnet schools, particularly other magnet middle schools, and how many other magnet middle schools are under-enrolled, and how many of other middle schools in these base draw areas are under-enrolled. So in terms of a dollars and cents and an efficiency issue, it may not be so bad for the district's bottom line if some families do choose temporarily to either try a Carroll Middle School or a Centennial Middle School or some other magnet middle schools in the area. Or in my area, in my neighborhood, we have 2 middle schools that are only about 60% to 70% enrolled. And we know that's not very efficient either. So there's pros and cons on either side of that issue. The other thing is if we are truly going to raise these ball fields up to the same elevation as MLK Boulevard, did I hear that wrong?
Yeah, again, it's tiered. So on option 3, it was raising the lower area, but that was going to be equivalent to MLK Boulevard. But then the ball fields would be at a
The ball fields are going to be on the northern end of the property, but I'm saying where the ball fields currently are now, where the school would go, that would be elevated up to. And so I'm curious how high that would actually be, because Dr. Ng brought up a very good point when you talk about the impact of people that live downhill and all of those residential neighbors on State Street. When you're going to add that much impermeable surface for the footprint of the entire middle school on that southern end of the property and raising it up, I don't know what we're going to hear back from Raleigh City Council from those impacted residents. So
I would expect that we're going to have less impervious surface area. We haven't designed it yet, but that is certainly the expectation and the goals.
less impervious surface area than the ball field?
Less impervious surface area
The existing school.
compared to future.
Okay.
Ms. Rice? I'm going off of the chair's order.
Okay. Yeah, I can save more for when we have discussion out there, but again, I really stress strongly that we keep the school on top of the head and you all figure out how to fix the budget. I think that it's really that simple sometimes, because we make everything else that simple sometimes when it's what we want to do. But for me, honestly, who's going to absorb the disruption in this proposal the most, and how does that mirror the racial history of who has absorbed destruction in this district, right? So we keep talking about these students. What I love is what Mr. Haggerty just said, It is okay that it's disrupted for a little while. A lot of schools are disrupted for a little while. But give this community something they deserve. It's not something, they deserve this. And Wake County needs to do it. They deserve it. History has proven they deserve it. It is okay to disrupt the 60% and ask them to compromise. But this community deserves what they want. I am not for phase 3. And first of all, I don't know who has visited the area, and we're talking about, and the facilities talking, I'm going to hear it, the facilities talking about raising the field. Do you live in Southeast Raleigh, and have you been over there? And you are not going to tell the difference of something, of some dirt raised, that's a school that's around the corner, and MLK is around. You're not seeing that. It doesn't make sense with what we're saying it's gonna do. It doesn't, not if you go over there. It's not the same. You can't see that. MLK is at the corner of the street, and that school is further down the road. You don't see the difference. You're not gonna see them because there's other houses and stuff there. That's not the difference of it being with the building, just to say, oh, we're gonna put the building up here on this end of the street. You're just saying, I'm gonna put the building on this end of the street. Why can't you leave the building where it originally was and designed to keep the historic nature of the school and figure the rest out the same way you do at all the other schools that you do? But I will not support option 3. 1, is not what my community is asking for. And 2, I know that our staff is competent enough to find another way.
Ms. Gordon?
Thank you. So I'm listening to everything that's being said. You know, in the beginning, when I asked about current facility standards, and you all explained that, you know, the existing building itself is very long and elongated, and we can see that from the drawings that we've been given. However, it seems like it's a glaring difference now that I'm looking at it, because Mr. Haggerty has pointed it out. The difference between option 2 and option 3. You look at the ball fields in option 2 look extremely larger than the ball fields on option 3, which we have been, I guess, prepped to think that it's the best option. So I'm trying to figure out how are the ball fields in option 3 the same size as option 2? Is it the same square footage? Are we trying to squeeze in a ball field that's not there? That's my first question. My second question, in respect to what Dr. Job said about going back to the table and looking at design options, have we considered maybe changing the design option so that perhaps we do keep a part of the building up on top of the hill and maybe still design a new building and have to separate the ball fields? I'm just using that as an example to say, have we thought about other innovative approaches to making sure that we are not disrupting learning, we're honoring the legacy of Ligon, and well, yeah, those are the 2 main reasons.
So I just want to, we're a little over time, but I'm willing to go to about 5:40, so, because we have teachers, semi-finalists waiting for us as well, so. And then we can continue the dialogue at the other side of the meeting, but just to be mindful of time, so we have about 8 minutes.
So I can answer part of the ball field because I have officiated on the ball field. It's not first of all, it's really crummy, as a lot of middle school ball fields go.
Can I push back on that? May I? I'm
Well,
sorry.
let me finish.
Okay.
It doesn't extend all the way, so that whole area, so the blank area we see where the ball fields are is not the entire ball field. So it's a little deceiving. It's easy if you go out there and walk it, but that aside, I object entirely to the idea of saying, staff, figure out the budget. They have presented budgets to us. We are in charge of budgets, just like we have two budgets. We have the CIP and then we have the superintendent's budget. And we have to find money for things. That's our job. We are presented with the cost of things, and we have to make those decisions. Phase 2, or option 2, is over budget, and it's the longest one. I have received 0 emails, and that doesn't mean that everyone would email me, but we get a lot of the same emails. I've received 0 emails for anything other than option 3. As a board member individual, we will honor the history. We have to be fiscally responsible to some degree. Like, we are hurting with our budgets already. And if we do option 2, then Cary High School, what happens to that? And then all the other schools. That includes Hunter's probably on that list, East Gardner's on that list, all of these things. It is a cascade, okay? If it was, I told Mr. Strickland this, if it was like $10 million, I would have been on option 2. But that cost, it really pushed me, and we don't have all this excess money. And we are going to tell voters, support this. I mean, it is a sizable bond that is probably coming, that we need for all of these projects. It is our job to ensure that if we did option 3, that it absolutely honors all the history and legacy, the best that can be done. And by the way, for the ball field, I even suggested, why don't we turf that to make it a really nice field? I have brought that up to staff, and to provide that kind of field for the community there too. And we talked about naming different things, and we found some really great stuff. It is something that is incumbent upon us, but for me as a board member, the idea of going along the longest project over price when we have all these other things and we got a bond coming up, I just think that's a mistake for us to send to the public. I mean, what's the message to the public on that? Sorry, I'm done.
Can I ask a process question? We're going to take an up or down vote on one of these, right? That's the plan, and...
That is the plan, up or down.
Okay.
Ms. Rice?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow through what Mr. Hirsch is saying. I think the intent of what I am sharing about not supporting Phase 3 and why I'm saying Phase 2 is not that I am omitting the cost. The challenge is that I am not sure of the realities of the real cost versus what's being shared, what we've seen in the past, some of the points that Mr. Hershey has brought up, some of the things that I've seen, some of the reasons why I ask certain questions even in other meetings that we have on an executive level, when I was watching about the changes of the cost, and I asked those questions for a reason when I was in those meetings, because I was looking at what costs were or were not, and that happens. And while we're saying this is what Phase 3 will cost us, and it's supposed to be so low, I am curious as to what happens when we get there, as some of the points that have been brought out, when it changes, what we're going to say, what we're going to do, that could have possibly gotten us what we wanted without having to. I'm just curious, and I, with no disrespect, sometimes I don't have the faith that I would like to have in my staff that are making these decisions because of the track record, not because I feel in a particular way, but because of the track record that I've seen. And so it brings me to the alarm of the reason why I say, not to say it in ignorance, fix the budget. I'm not saying it in ignorance. I'm just saying what I've seen in the past. I'm saying what I've seen in as over the 50-year process that Wake County has been in existence. I've seen that we do what we do when we want to do it, and we don't do what we do when we don't want to do it. And I've seen staff bring things to us that seems oh so great, and is not necessarily the most sufficient thing to do, but is what they might desire to do. But I know that as a board, yes, we have to look at budget and all of those other things, but we also reserve the right to say, this is what we envision, we need you to get this done, and within these reasons. Find the people and the cost, because it makes me think that you've already done the bidding, you've already done all the other stuff that says this is what it is. So I'm curious, have we already chosen everyone that's going to do the building, everyone that's going to do the materials or whatever thing that it is that's driving this cost to that level? How other detailed people have we looked at with the mobile units? We went to the SBA fair. There were all these vendors out there, people who even gave strong recommendations of schools in other counties that have been distraught due to natural disasters, and the students had to be displaced as well into mobile units, and they gave a great recommendation of spaces of people who rebuilt that, and students had to be in there as well, and it did not disrupt anything, and it was a reasonable cost. And this county is no way near the affluence of Wake. So I'm simply saying, I'm not saying that staff isn't capable, but I do question some of the choices that are presented before us and elevated in the way that it wants to be elevated. And then we sit back and have to make a choice based off what someone else's preference was, not what's really the right preference. And that's all.
Taylor, do you or staff have any?
Yeah, I do, but I'll, for the sake of time, I know it's 5:39, and so I can share those when we get to the action item and address many of the questions that we've had.
We'll adjourn our work session.
So you ready for adjournment tomorrow? Yeah. I have to look at the school colors. I don't remember. I've been out there, but it's,
Well, they'll be on like 10 on each side. So could you take a picture from here while they're